2005, I published an article in Nature Biotech where we described the CI process. The CI process has been, I'll say, the stepping stone on building a competitive intelligence function at Novartis, and then taking all those learnings into Roche and then into Atacana. So what we want to do today is spend a little bit of time with you, explaining you what does the CI process mean.
So when I joined Novartis, I was leveraging this framework to help educate my stakeholders around competitive intelligence. What it allowed me to do was quickly build rapport with the stakeholders, explain to them how we work, why it's important, and that allowed me to get more budget, more funding to do more of the work.
As Abhi mentioned, a lot of times stakeholders need to be educated on competitive intelligence. There's many definitions of what CI is involved. There's many definitions on the different type of activities. So this provides a common language within Atacana on how we think and how we talk about competitive intelligence.
CI process is a little bit more focused on the research and analysis component. And what we've learned over time is that you need to think beyond just the research, analysis and distribution. The way Salvador published it is sort of starting after you've had the discussions with the stakeholder, you're really clear on the intelligence requirements. So before that, you really need to understand a bit more about what the client really wants to do, how they're planning to use the information, what business decisions they're trying to make. So that's very important to keep in mind.
The first step in the CI process is the intelligence requirements. The intelligence requirements needs to be linked to the internal strategy, internal decision-making points. So as Abhi mentioned, when you think about the kind of value model, that stakeholder engagement is critical to get this first step right. So if we know what the client is trying to achieve, if we know what are the decision points that are going to be happening, if we have at least a general understanding of how the competition is thinking about the marketplace and some of their activities, then that provides the baseline to develop the intelligence requirement. A lot of times with the clients will give us very generic questions. It's our job to try to make a very specific, real understanding. How is that connected to a decision that is coming up, or to an external event, or to a business assumption? And then really understanding by when do they need information, and also understanding how likely is that we can get that information in that time period, or also understanding that sometimes we need to wait time for companies to figure out internally when that information will become available. So the timeliness, again, plays a role here.
Yeah, so once we get the intelligence requirements, we develop them further, we break them out, and we structure them, we categorize them. And then the main next step is to develop the collection plan. Within the collection plan, what's important is that we break down all the questions that we have and structure them by the types of sources that we believe we can tap into in order to get these questions answered. So it's really a thought process around structuring the questions, who to talk to, where to go for the information.
Yeah, and as you talk about it, I think when we think about the collection plan, it's not just about the collection plan, right? It's also about the communication plan. We need to manage expectation when we're going to deliver specific reports to the client. But if we focus on the secondary or desktop research, we can think about it as internal information, internal to Atacana, internal to the client, and then it's external information that's out in the public domain.
It's basically information that is either open source, anybody can access. So that's really like the news, anything you can find on Google that's open source, easily accessible. But there's also actually closed source information in the public domain, but you have to pay for them. So those are like the paid databases, the subscriptions. Now they are technically secondary data because they are available to the public, but they're one level deeper. So you actually have to spend more effort into accessing those types of sources of information. Smart searches can actually reveal quite a lot of the answers from many of the research plans that we have.
Before we talk to the client, we need to understand a little bit about the client. We need to understand a little bit what's happening in the marketplace. So sometimes we can think about secondary research, building our knowledge within the space. So even though in the CR process we put it more or less as the third step in the process, sometimes it can be the first step if we need to ramp up and really understand what's happening in the place.
And in our experience, there's actually a lot available, maybe not with the most easy searches, but once you start digging a little bit deeper into the sources that are not coming up right away with Google searches, but into specific files, specific websites, let's say regulatory websites. You just get such a wealth of information that it really helps you structure a lot of the data gaps that need to be filled. So really secondary is the pillar and the foundation of all the work we do, and that sets the foundation for the primary research or the human intelligence gathering.
So again, when you think about desktop research, a lot of time is information that is already a bit old, information that already has been processed, edited, published, so it's not the most recent information. So human collection is again to fill in the gaps, but also to really try to understand what the future looks like. How are different stakeholders thinking about the future and some of the things that they're planning to do. Competitive intelligence, human research, or primary research is different from market research.
Our interviews are not structured in the way you would do with market research, where you can actually access somebody, sit them down for an hour and read off a script. With primary intelligence, we have to be really smart in our approach, building relationships with the sources to talk to them. But really what we want to get is information from them without them being aware that they're sharing specific knowledge. So building relationships is very important. It's a lot more difficult, it's a lot more time consuming, you'll have access to fewer sources, and you may not get all the answers from one single source, so you need to go to different sources, and sometimes not everybody has it. So it's a lot more capital intensive, it's a lot more difficult.
So when we think about getting a competitive advantage, the human intelligence is really what differentiates a lot of the strategies quality between a small company versus a large organization that is really investing in gathering that human intelligence component.
So the next step is the processing and analysis. So it's really organizing, categorizing, structuring all the data that we have, linking it back to the intelligence requirements to see where the gaps are, understanding the confidence levels of the intelligence that we have. Do we have enough sources interviewed for the critical questions? And that then allows us to decide whether the next step is needed. Do we need to do an additional round of research, of collection? Can we find anything else in the secondary domain? Do we need to engage with other sources to fill in those gaps?
There's a little bit of difference if we're doing a one-time project like a deep dive versus if it's something that we're doing on an ongoing basis. Maybe we need to create a CI alert, right? If it's something that we picked up either through primary or secondary that has high impact, maybe we don't wait to create a final report or to create a quarterly report. Maybe something that we need to communicate right away. A client, this is something that has an impact on your forecast, has an impact on your strategy, and we might have to do some type of CI alert.
From the CI principles, when we said having continuous ongoing data collection, it's really staying on top of things, identifying small changes in the landscape that then give us the ability to react quickly for the clients.
So we do all that, we put all the information, we process it, we create a nice slide deck, but what are some of the shortcomings that we have seen when we put a final report together?
So there's good CI, that's answering the questions, but great CI and coming to this final analysis really comes down to being able to simplify what all the information means, what the analysis means to our clients. Oftentimes when we see an analysis, it's very easy to summarize, to categorize, and to create summaries that way. But to make it really impactful is how can we create a story that really tells the difference and why it's important to our client, how it's impacting their strategy.
You're busy with meetings, you're back-to-back meetings, you get a report of 200 slides, are you really going to look at it?
Oh, if you have a lot of spare time, but I usually don't, so.
Yeah, so again, it goes back to this idea that when you think about the final analysis, is about the story. Make sure that it's engaging, that captivates the end users, so the client, that they really are receptive to the information. But most important is connecting the dots on what the information says that we have gathered, how does that relate to their strategy. So the last step we have here in the CI process is pretty simple because we call it a CI review. So a CI review can be just a meeting, but when we think about CI review in terms of the Atacane value model, where does that fit in?
Well, so that's a great question, and that's why we've developed that CI value model with the last component going from the recommendations to competitive readiness. What that means to us is that it doesn't become just a document. As you see in our CI process, we have the documentation part. This is usually a PowerPoint, an email, uploaded on a server, and so then it becomes documentation-led. If you want to have an impact with clients, as Sal mentioned earlier, you need to be able to change behavior. The simplest way is having a conversation, at least with the immediate stakeholder, but ideally with the broader group, really discussing what it means and what to do next. So really thinking about taking action on the intelligence and on the recommendations.
We need to make sure that they are developing processes internally on how they consume competitive intelligence on an ongoing basis. So when we think about CR review, we can think about a competitive threat assessment, right? If there's a lot of information, there's a lot of competitors, and they really know where to focus, the competitive threat assessments allow the client to really narrow down the competitors or the key areas where they need to deliver or they need to focus on. Another one is competitive simulations, wargaming, which is really, again, getting all the information and role-playing the competition with a cross-functional team to make sure that they really internalize it, role-play the competition to think beyond the information or how they might act or react based on what the client is doing. We need to think about how does this fit in also within the internal processes. So if there's a brand plan, there's probably situation analysis beforehand, and before that is what our opportunity to really influence the situation analysis and then really help the client understand how does the brand plan translate into different markets based on the different market dynamics. So the CI review in the simplest form, it is a presentation, hopefully with a cross-functional team, but it's really about this competitive readiness process and making sure that the client has a process throughout the year on how they leverage this information. And if we do all of this, then what's the ultimate goal?
Well, the ultimate goal is to support the winning strategy for our clients.
So as we think about scaling Atacana, it's important that we all understand the CI process. For each one of the boxes in the CI process, there's a process behind that. So we'll be covering that in future videos. But the key thing here is that the CI process provides us a common language on how we need to think about competitive intelligence, and that common language is for internal purposes, but also on how we communicate with the client, educate the client on everything that's involved in the CI process. Any final thoughts, Sabi?
Well, my final thought is thank you, Sal, for publishing this. It's been extremely helpful for me in my career, and it continues to be useful today, so I hope it's going to serve you well.
Thank you.
Thank you.